It is the spring of 1885. Somewhere in Lower Manhattan, in a building that smells of machine oil and ambition, a young man approaches his employer's desk. He is 28 years old. He is Serbian by birth, American by choice, and extraordinary by nature. He has spent the last year doing the kind of work that would break most men, redesigning arc lighting systems, solving problems that Edison's own engineers had declared unsolvable. He has done it, all of it. Now he wants what he was promised. Thomas Edison looks up from his desk. He is 37. He is already famous in a way the younger man is not yet. A fame built not just on invention, but on performance, on the careful management of public attention. He has perfected the art of appearing to be a genius while also being, undeniably, a genius. It is a combination most people cannot distinguish. The younger man states his case. He has done the work. He was promised $50,000. Edison smiles. "Tesla," he says, "you don't understand our American humor. There was no $50,000. There never had been." And from that moment, that specific, documented, almost casual act of betrayal, one of the most consequential rivalries in the history of human civilization began. Not with a discovery, not with a war of patents, with a joke. Thomas Alva Edison was born in Milan, Ohio in 1847, the seventh child of a family that had no particular reason to expect anything remarkable from him. He was a difficult student. Partially deaf from childhood, he was pulled from school after only 3 months, his teacher reportedly describing him as addled. His mother, a former school teacher, took over his education herself. This fact matters, not as biography, but as psychology. Edison grew up understanding that the world would underestimate him. He turned that knowledge into strategy. By the time he was in his 20s, he was not merely inventing things, he was industrializing invention itself. In 1876, he established what he called an invention factory in Menlo Park, New Jersey, the first institution of its kind in the world. The model was simple: gather talented men, give them problems, produce solutions on a commercial schedule. Edison understood something that most scientists did not. A discovery that cannot be sold is not yet finished. He was pragmatic to the point of ruthlessness. He had no patience for theory he couldn't see. He once said, famously, that genius was 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. He believed it, and more importantly, he lived it. He slept 4 hours a night. He worked through illness. He treated the people around him as components in a machine, useful precisely insofar as they produced results. He was also, by most accounts, genuinely brilliant. Not in the way myths require brilliance, not serene and visionary. His was a grinding, relentless, practical intelligence that could hold dozens of problems in parallel and tolerate failure on an industrial scale, because he understood failure as information. It was ugly. It was exhausting. It worked. Nikola Tesla was born in 1856 in Smiljan, a village in what is now Croatia, to a Serbian Orthodox priest and a woman of remarkable memory. His mother, Georgina, could reportedly recite entire books from memory, a gift she passed directly to her son. From childhood, Tesla experienced visions. Not metaphorically. He would describe flashes of light that preceded moments of insight, visual phenomena that accompanied his thinking in ways he struggled to explain, and others struggled to believe. He was, by his own account, constructing and testing complete machines in his mind before he ever built them, running them through virtual cycles, checking for wear, adjusting tolerances. Mental prototypes that, when he eventually built them in the physical world, often worked on the first attempt. He studied physics and engineering. He was, by the testimony of his professors, extraordinary. He was also, by the same testimony, unstable, prone to disappearing for days, prone to fixations, prone to bouts of illness that were almost certainly neurological in origin. He graduated without a formal degree, a fact that would quietly humiliate him for the rest of his life. He came to America in 1884 with 4 cents in his pocket and a letter of introduction to Thomas Edison. The letter, written by one of Edison's European associates, contained a line that has become famous. "I know 2 great men, and you are one of them. The other is this young man." What Edison made of that sentence we cannot know.
But he hired Tesla, and for approximately 1 year, these two men occupied the same building. Two different kinds of intelligence, two different relationships to the physical world, two different ideas about what electricity was, what it could do, and who deserved to control it. The collision was not an accident. It was inevitable.
To understand what Tesla and Edison were actually fighting about, you have to understand what electricity meant to the world in the 1880s. It meant everything. For most of human history, the productive day ended at dusk. You could burn candles, burn oil, burn gas, but light from burning things was expensive, inconsistent, dangerous, and dim. The Industrial Revolution had not fundamentally changed this. Factories still had to close when the light failed. Streets were still dark. The difference between a wealthy home and a poor one could be measured almost entirely in how many hours of light it could afford. In 1879, Thomas Edison changed this. His incandescent light bulb, not the first, but the first commercially viable one, was not merely an invention. It was a promise that darkness, the oldest enemy of human productivity, could be defeated permanently, affordably, at scale. But a light bulb is useless without power, and power required a system. Edison had built one. His direct current system, DC, delivered electricity at a consistent voltage along copper wires. He had proven it could work in Lower Manhattan, where he had installed the world's first commercial power station at Pearl Street in 1882. The system was elegant in its simplicity, straightforward to understand, easy to regulate. It also had a fundamental physical limitation that Edison either didn't fully understand or refused to acknowledge. DC power could not be transmitted efficiently over long distances. The resistance of the wire dissipated the energy. To power a city from a central plant, you would need an impossible quantity of copper. To power a nation, the mathematics simply did not work. This was not a minor technical inconvenience. This was an existential problem for Edison's entire business model. He had spent years and significant investor capital building a DC infrastructure. His reputation, his company, his legacy were all tied to a vision of America powered by direct current. Every power station built on his model represented a bet that DC was the future. And somewhere, in the back of his brilliant, practical, commercially sophisticated mind, he almost certainly knew the mathematics didn't add up. Tesla knew the answer. He had known it since 1882, when he had first conceived, fully formed he claimed, during a walk in a Budapest park, the design of an alternating current induction motor. AC power could be transmitted at high voltages over vast distances, then stepped down to safe levels by a transformer. It was more dangerous than DC at the point of use. It was technically more complex, but it could power a continent from a handful of plants. It was the correct answer to the question the age was asking. The question was, who would control it? Because the person who controlled the electrical infrastructure of the industrializing world would not merely be wealthy, they would be, in a very literal sense, the most powerful person who had ever lived. This was not just a scientific dispute. This was a war. Edison's ascent. By the time Tesla arrived in New York, Edison had already become something unprecedented in American life, a celebrity inventor. He had not merely invented things, he had performed invention for an audience. The phonograph, unveiled in 1877, did something that no previous technology had ever done. It captured the human voice and played it back. When Edison first demonstrated it to the staff of Scientific American magazine, grown men were reportedly stunned into silence. The editor wrote that the machine talked. Not metaphorically, it talked. And when Edison demonstrated it to President Rutherford B. Hayes at the White House, he kept the president awake until 2 in the morning, both of them listening to the machine repeat the sounds it had stored. The press called Edison the Wizard of Menlo Park. He accepted the title with something approaching theatrical modesty, which was its own kind of performance. The incandescent light bulb followed, then the Pearl Street Station, then the first commercial electrical system in history. What the hagiographic accounts of Edison tend to obscure is how deliberately all of this was managed.
Edison understood press relations in a way that most scientists did not. He understood that perception shaped funding, that public attention was convertible into investment capital, that being famous for being smart was commercially different from merely being smart. He cultivated reporters, he staged demonstrations, he controlled access to his laboratory with the precision of a theater director managing entrances and exits. He was not dishonest exactly, but he was a showman. And showmen, by definition, show you what they want you to see. There was also the matter of his workers. Menlo Park attracted talented men. It attracted them because Edison was exciting, because working near his energy felt like participation in history, because the problems he gave his engineers were genuinely hard and interesting. Men like Charles Batchelor, John Cruzy, Francis Upton, brilliant men who contributed enormously to Edison's inventions and received, in return, relatively modest compensation, inconsistent credit, and the occasional public humiliation of having their work attributed entirely to their employer. Edison justified this in a way. He provided the resources, the direction, the commercial vision. Without him, the individual experiments meant nothing. With him, they changed the world. This was not entirely wrong, but it was convenient, and it created a machine, the Edison laboratory, that ran on human intelligence it consumed faster than it replenished.
Tesla's ascent. Tesla's journey to America was a story of loss before it was a story of triumph. He had worked in Paris and Strasbourg for the Continental Edison Company. He had tried, repeatedly, to interest European businessmen in his alternating current motor. He had been met with polite indifference, bureaucratic obstruction, and broken financial promises, a pattern that would repeat throughout his life with a consistency that suggests something beyond bad luck. He arrived in New York in June 1884. He was tall, almost strikingly so, over 6 feet, thin to the point of gauntness. He was well-dressed despite having almost no money. He spoke 6 languages. He had, by his own account, a nearly perfect visual memory and the ability to perform advanced calculations entirely in his head. He also had, buried beneath the extraordinary abilities, a set of vulnerabilities that he would spend his life trying to conceal and that the world would eventually use against him. He needed validation with the particular desperation of someone who has never quite received it. His father had not wanted him to be an engineer. He had wanted Nikola to become a priest, like himself. Tesla had spent his young adulthood in the quiet war between his own nature and his father's expectations, a war he technically won and emotionally never recovered from. When his father died in 1879, before Tesla had achieved anything, the wound remained open. He also needed to be understood, not merely appreciated, understood. There is a difference. Appreciation can be performed, understanding cannot. And the tragedy of Tesla's life, visible in retrospect with painful clarity, is that he was nearly impossible to truly understand. His mind operated at a frequency most people could not perceive, let alone match. When he met Edison, he thought he had finally found someone who could. The year Tesla spent at Edison's laboratory, 1884 to 1885, is well documented in its outlines and deeply ambiguous in its details. What we know: Tesla worked extraordinary hours. He solved problems with the arc lighting system that had stumped Edison's other engineers. He was, by multiple accounts, impressive enough that Edison gave him increasingly complex work. What we also know: Edison did not take Tesla's AC ideas seriously. Or perhaps he took them more seriously than he let on. Either interpretation is consistent with what followed. When Tesla finally raised the subject of alternating current, Edison's response was dismissive. AC was impractical, he said. AC was dangerous. The world he was building ran on DC, and Tesla would be wise to set aside his theoretical fantasies and focus on the practical work at hand. Tesla set aside nothing. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that the man he was working for was not merely his employer. He was his obstacle. The break, when it came, was over money, the $50,000, the American joke. Tesla quit. He was 28 years old, in a foreign country,
with no financial resources, no institutional backing, and an idea that the most celebrated inventor in the world had just publicly dismissed as impractical. He spent the winter of 1885 digging ditches. This is not metaphor. He literally dug ditches, working as a laborer to survive while trying to find investors for his electrical ideas. The man who would eventually hold over 300 patents and give the world the electrical infrastructure it still runs on spent months in manual labor because no one would give him money to build what he already knew worked. History has a particular cruelty for geniuses who are also poor. The rescue came in 1887 in the form of two investors, Robert Lane and Benjamin Vail, who agreed to fund a new company, the Tesla Electric Company. Tesla now had a laboratory of his own. He had space to build what he had only been able to imagine. In 1888, he presented a paper to the American Institute of Electrical Engineers describing a complete alternating current system: motor, generator, transmission. The paper was elegant, complete, and devastating in its implications. In the audience was a man named George Westinghouse.
Westinghouse was not Edison. He was quieter, more methodical, less spectacular. He was also a businessman of considerable acuity, who understood, when he heard Tesla's paper, exactly what it meant. He bought Tesla's patents for $200,000, a staggering sum, plus royalties. The war, which had been a skirmish until this moment, was about to become something else entirely. Edison had a problem. He had, arguably, several problems, but they reduced to one. He was about to be wrong in public. The financial stakes were enormous. By 1888, Edison had secured significant investment from J.P. Morgan and the Vanderbilt family for his DC electrical infrastructure. Power stations had been built, contracts had been signed. The Edison General Electric Company was a real enterprise with real obligations. If AC proved superior, and the mathematics already suggested it would, the value of everything Edison had built was in jeopardy. Edison faced a choice that reveals everything about who he was. He could engage with the technical argument honestly. He could examine the evidence for AC, acknowledge its advantages for long-distance transmission, and attempt to adapt his system or negotiate a place in the emerging infrastructure. This was the rational choice. It was also, given the financial exposure, a choice that would cost him, and more importantly, his investors, a great deal of money. He chose differently. He chose to make the public afraid. What followed has come to be known, almost whimsically, as the War of Currents. The name implies a certain gentlemanly quality, competing laboratories, dueling papers, the clean combat of scientific debate. It was not like that. Edison launched a public relations campaign of extraordinary ruthlessness. He and his associates, most visibly Harold Brown, an electrical engineer with murky ties to the Edison organization, began staging public demonstrations of the dangers of alternating current. These demonstrations involved the public electrocution of animals. Dogs were killed at Columbia University. Calves were killed. Eventually, in an act that was both grotesque and grimly effective as spectacle, a circus elephant named Topsy was electrocuted at Coney Island in 1903. Though by then, the war was largely over and the act served primarily as a final, ugly postscript. Edison's position was simple. AC kills. DC is safe. The choice is obvious. The argument had a surface plausibility. AC power, running at high voltage, was genuinely more dangerous at the point of contact than DC. The demonstrations were real. The deaths were real. What was misleading, and Edison almost certainly knew this, was the framing. DC at the voltages required for practical use was also dangerous. The question was not which current could kill, but which system could power a civilization. And on that question, the mathematics favored AC beyond any serious dispute. Edison either didn't understand this, which is hard to believe given his intelligence, or he understood it perfectly and chose to obscure it. The second interpretation is more consistent with his behavior. There was also the matter of the electric chair. In 1888, New York State was looking for a more humane method of execution than hanging.
Harold Brown, the same man conducting public electrocution demonstrations at Columbia, lobbied successfully for electrocution as the method. He then went further. He secretly acquired Westinghouse AC generators through intermediaries to use in the electric chair. The goal was explicit. If AC became the method of state execution, the word Westinghouse would become synonymous with death. George Westinghouse was outraged. He hired lawyers to prevent the use of his equipment. He wrote public letters. He argued, correctly, that his generators were being deliberately associated with killing as a commercial tactic. The first person executed in the electric chair, William Kemmler, was killed in August 1890. The execution was botched. It took multiple attempts over several minutes. Witnesses were reportedly sickened. Westinghouse, upon hearing the account, said they would have done better with an axe. Edison called the process Westinghousing. He was trying to turn a proper noun into a verb meaning to be killed by electricity. Tesla, through all of this, occupied a complicated position. He was not a businessman. He was not a publicist. He was not equipped for the kind of public combat that Edison waged with ease and apparent relish. He was a scientist in the deepest sense, a man whose relationship to the physical world was primary, and whose relationship to other people was, to put it generously, secondary. He did what he could with what he had. He gave public demonstrations of his AC system, often theatrical ones. He would famously pass high-frequency current through his own body to light lamps without wires, standing in a shower of electrical discharge while remaining apparently unharmed. These demonstrations were genuine and spectacular, but they were also the demonstrations of a man who communicated through spectacle because he lacked the infrastructure, financial, political, social, to communicate any other way. He was fighting a war with a sword. Edison was fighting it with an army. The inflection point came in 1893 at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. The fair was an opportunity to demonstrate what electrical power could do at scale. The organizing committee invited bids to light the entire exposition. Edison's company bid over $1 million. Westinghouse bid less than half that amount, using the cost efficiencies that AC transmission made possible. Westinghouse won the contract. For 17 nights, Westinghouse and Tesla lit the World's Fair with 200,000 light bulbs, the largest electrical installation in history to that point. Crowds who had never seen electric light saw it for the first time in quantities that felt supernatural. The fair became a symbol of what electricity could mean for human civilization, and it ran on AC. The following year, 1894, the contract to harness Niagara Falls, the first great hydroelectric project in history, went to Westinghouse and Tesla as well. The falls would generate AC power and transmit it 22 miles to Buffalo, New York, a distance that Edison's DC system could never have served. The war of currents was over. AC had won. What Edison did next is instructive. He did not concede publicly. He did not acknowledge in any documented statement that he had been wrong about alternating current. He moved on. He redirected his attention. He continued inventing the motion picture camera, improved phonograph cylinders, a series of mining ventures that would consume enormous resources and fail spectacularly. The Edison General Electric Company merged with the Thomson-Houston Electric Company in 1892 to form General Electric, a merger that diluted Edison's control and, pointedly, removed his name from the company entirely. Edison claimed indifference to this. He was almost certainly not indifferent. The man who had electrocuted animals to prevent the future found himself living in the future anyway. He simply refused to describe what had happened as defeat. Tesla, meanwhile, should have been triumphant. He was not. The standard narrative of Tesla versus Edison goes something like this. Edison was the cynical businessman who exploited Tesla's genius, then tried to destroy his greatest invention, and ultimately failed. Justice was served, the better idea won. The wronged immigrant proved his worth. This narrative is satisfying. It is also incomplete. Let's start with Edison. Thomas Edison was cruel to Nikola Tesla. This is documented. The broken promise of the $50,000 was not an isolated incident.
It was characteristic of how Edison treated the people who worked for him. He was not uniquely terrible to Tesla. He was consistently, structurally terrible to brilliant people who had less power than he did. But Edison's campaign against AC current was not simply greed, and it was not simply dishonesty. It was also, at its core, an act of genuine belief. Edison had spent his life translating abstract electrical phenomena into machines that worked. His instinct was always toward the practical, the testable, the provable. AC current, at the voltages Tesla was proposing, genuinely did kill people. The safety concerns were not fabricated. They were real, if incomplete. Edison's failure was not that he noticed the danger, it was that he stopped there. He noticed the danger, recognized its commercial utility as an argument, and allowed commercial utility to consume the honest scientific inquiry that should have come after. He used a real concern to avoid a real reckoning. This is not the behavior of a villain. It is the behavior of a man who has spent decades being right and cannot tolerate the specific experience of being wrong when it matters most. There is a word for this. It is not stupidity. It is not dishonesty exactly. It is ego. Now Tesla. Nikola Tesla won the war of currents. He gave the world the electrical infrastructure it still uses. He deserved far more recognition than he received during his lifetime, and the romantic narrative of the wronged genius is not wrong. It is, however, not the whole story. Tesla had a quality that his admirers rarely discuss. He was terrible with money, and he was terrible with it in a way that was self-destructive to an almost willed degree. After the success at Niagara Falls, Tesla was, briefly, wealthy. He had received substantial payments from Westinghouse, though far less than his patents would have earned if he had held them. At a certain point during the financial strain of the War of Currents, Tesla had voluntarily torn up his royalty agreement with Westinghouse, surrendering royalties that would have made him one of the wealthiest men in America. He did this, he said, because he believed in Westinghouse, because he didn't want commercial pressure to impede the technology. This was generous. It was also, one cannot avoid noticing, the act of a man who was uncomfortable with wealth in a way that had psychological roots deeper than generosity. Tesla could not operate in the world of money, negotiation, and human compromise. It was not merely that he was unworldly, it was that the worldly realm seemed to hold something threatening for him, something that could contaminate the purity of his thinking. He preferred the laboratory to the boardroom. He preferred the idea to its execution. He preferred, on some level, to be a pure genius rather than a successful one. The consequences were severe. After Niagara Falls, Tesla pursued increasingly ambitious and increasingly impractical projects. The most dramatic was Wardenclyffe Tower, a massive structure on Long Island that Tesla intended as the center of a global wireless communication and energy transmission system. He had secured funding from J.P. Morgan, the same Morgan who had backed Edison, on the basis of a wireless communication system. Then he told Morgan the full vision, not just communication, but free wireless energy for the entire world. Morgan asked the obvious question. If the energy is transmitted freely through the air, how do we charge for it? How do we put a meter on it? Tesla had no answer. Not because he hadn't thought about it, but because the question revealed a fundamental incompatibility between Tesla's vision and the commercial world that would have to build it. Morgan withdrew his funding. Wardenclyffe was never completed. It was eventually demolished and sold for the value of its materials. Tesla spent the last 30 years of his life cycling through periods of intense work and profound desolation. He was occasionally celebrated, occasionally forgotten, frequently broke. He died alone in the New Yorker hotel in 1943, feeding pigeons from his window and corresponding with fewer and fewer people who understood what he was talking about. He was 86 years old. Here is the uncomfortable truth that the rivalry asks us to consider. Edison understood the world, but refused to see the future. Tesla saw the future, but refused to understand the world. Both positions are a kind of arrogance. Edison's arrogance was the more damaging in the short term. He tried to poison a technology to protect his business interests. But Tesla's arrogance was the more tragic in the long term. He repeatedly sabotaged his own commercial success because deep down, he found commercial success aesthetically unsatisfying. There is also this: the two men needed each other in ways neither would ever admit. Edison needed Tesla, or someone like Tesla, because his system was wrong. And without a competitor to force the confrontation, he might have delayed the transition to AC for a decade or more, at enormous cost to industrial progress. Tesla functioned as the irritant that made Edison's world honest. And Tesla needed Edison. He needed the betrayal of 1885 to break from Edison's orbit and work independently. Without the $50,000 insult, Tesla might have spent years as a talented employee in someone else's laboratory, working on someone else's problems. The cruelty that ended their relationship was also, in a dark way, the act that liberated him. Neither man would ever acknowledge this. They never spoke again after Tesla quit in 1885. Edison lived for 46 years after the end of the War of Currents. He was not idle. He continued inventing. The motion picture camera, which he developed alongside W.K.L. Dixon, changed entertainment and culture as profoundly as the light bulb had changed commerce. He produced a series of later career inventions of varying commercial success. He was, until the end, a working inventor. But the years after 1893 were shadowed by a pattern of grandiose projects and costly failures. His attempt to develop a new process for mining iron ore consumed 10 years and millions of dollars before he finally acknowledged it would never work. He invested enormously in a scheme to manufacture concrete houses, a project that produced no houses. His battery for electric vehicles was promising and was eventually commercially successful, but only after years of struggle and broken promises to investors. He remained famous. American culture needed him to be famous. He had become, almost by accident, a symbol of American ingenuity, and the country was reluctant to revise that story even when the details argued for revision. In 1928, the year before his death, the United States Congress awarded him a special Congressional Gold Medal. He was 81 years old. He died in October 1931. There is a legend, almost certainly apocryphal but persistent, that cities across America dimmed their lights in tribute on the night of his funeral. The image is too clean for the actual history, but it captures something real about how the country understood him. As a man who had brought the light, whatever else he had done in bringing it. What Edison's later years revealed, beneath the continued activity and continued fame, was a man who had not fully resolved the central question the rivalry had posed. He had lost, and he had never admitted it. He had won, in the broader sense that his business model, not his specific technology, but his model of commercialized invention, became the template for the entire 20th century of American industrial innovation. Bell Labs, Xerox PARC, the entire apparatus of institutional R&D descends directly from what Edison built at Menlo Park. So he lost the argument about electricity, and he won the argument about how to produce the future. He died with those two facts unreconciled. Tesla's last decades were a different kind of tragedy, quieter, more interior, more complete. After Wardenclyffe, after Morgan's withdrawal, Tesla went on inventing. He produced real and important work on radio wave propagation, on turbine design, on early concepts in radar. He was awarded in 1917 the Edison Medal, the highest honor given by the American Institute of Electrical Engineers. The Edison Medal. He accepted it. He gave a speech. He did not appear to note the irony publicly, though he almost certainly noted it privately. He continued to make announcements, increasingly spectacular ones, about death rays, about communication with other planets, about a world system of free energy that would end war. Some of these were genuine scientific proposals wrapped in hyperbolic language. Some were the products of an aging mind that had lost the commercial and social support it needed to stay calibrated to reality. It is difficult even now to distinguish cleanly between them. The world increasingly stopped trying to distinguish. He was celebrated on his 75th birthday with a party on the cover of Time magazine. He was dismissed in private by scientists who found his later claims untestable. He was admired by people who did not fully understand what he had done. He was misunderstood in both directions. His real accomplishments undervalued by those who thought he was merely a dreamer. His later claims overvalued by those who wanted him to be a prophet. He spent his last years in room 3327 of the New Yorker Hotel, on a pension from, of all companies, the Yugoslav government.
He kept pigeons, particularly a white female pigeon that he cared for with what can only be described as devotion. When she died, he wrote, "I have been feeding pigeons, thousands of them for years. But there was one, a beautiful bird, pure white with light gray tips on its wings. I loved that pigeon as a man loves a woman, and she loved me." He died in January 1943. The hotel maid found him. He was alone. His papers were seized, unusually and controversially, by the United States government within hours of his death, ostensibly on national security grounds. Some of them remain partially classified. The full inventory of what Tesla was working on at the end of his life is still not entirely public. That detail, the seized papers, the partial classification, has fed a century of conspiracy theorizing that Tesla would almost certainly have found both flattering and deeply frustrating. His actual work deserved serious attention. The mythology that replaced it is a different kind of distortion.
How does history remember them? Edison is remembered as the founder of a tradition, the industrialization of innovation that remains the dominant model of technological development. General Electric, the company that outlasted him by a century, is a direct descendant of what he built. The phonograph, the motion picture, the first commercial power system, the list is real and extraordinary. He is also remembered, in certain communities, as the man who tried to electrocute the future. The War of Currents, which was obscure history for most of the 20th century, has been rehabilitated in recent decades, partly by the internet, partly by the growing cultural appetite for stories of wronged geniuses, into a straightforward morality play. Edison bad, Tesla good. This is wrong, or at least insufficient. What Edison did in the War of Currents was ethically indefensible. It was also intelligible. It was the behavior of a man who had built something real and was not prepared to watch it become obsolete without a fight. You can condemn the method and still understand the fear. Tesla is remembered in popular culture as the patron saint of underappreciated genius, the immigrant whose ideas were stolen, the visionary who saw further than his time and was destroyed for it. This is more accurate than the Edison caricature, but still incomplete. Tesla was genuinely visionary. The AC power system is not a metaphor, it is a real infrastructure running right now in every powered building on Earth. His work on radio wave propagation predated Marconi's commercial radio by years. His patents on polyphase AC motors are foundational documents in electrical engineering. He was also self-defeating in ways that went beyond circumstance. The pattern of his life, the brilliant concept, the promising start, the commercial failure, the isolation, repeated too consistently to be entirely the world's fault. There was something in Tesla that resisted the forms of compromise that success in the world requires. Whether this was nobility or pathology, or both, is a question the available evidence cannot fully resolve. What can be said is this: the world Edison built and the infrastructure Tesla gave it are inseparable. The man who commercialized invention and the man who refused to commercialize it produced, between them, the electrical century. Neither could have done it alone. Neither chose to acknowledge the other's contribution. Was the rivalry necessary? This is the question that the easy narrative avoids. The easy narrative says, if only Edison hadn't been greedy and fearful, Tesla's genius would have flourished faster, the transition to AC would have been smoother, and less harm would have been done. The harder answer is, probably not. The War of Currents accelerated the public debate about electrical standards in ways that a polite scientific discussion would not have. It forced a clear demonstration, at the World's Fair, at Niagara Falls, that settled the question in a way that technical papers alone could not. The conflict was ugly, but it was also clarifying. There is also this: Tesla, without Edison, might never have left Europe, might never have come to America, might never have had the institutional contact, however brutal its end, that connected him to the industrial world his ideas required. The enemy was also the gate. There is a photograph of Tesla taken late in his life. We don't know exactly when, but he is old in it, clearly old, the bones of his face pressing close against the skin. He is sitting in his hotel room. Behind him, through the window, you can see the lights of New York City, millions of them, all of them running on the system he invented. And you look at his face in that photograph, and you try to read it. This face that spent 80 years at the edge of something it could almost reach. And the feeling you get is not satisfaction. It is not bitterness exactly. It is something more like longing, as if the lights were still somehow not enough. Edison, in his last years, was asked whether he had any regrets. He said he regretted not sleeping more. This may have been a joke. It may have been the truest thing he ever said. The war between them, if you trace it to its roots, was never really about electricity. It was about two men who each believed, with the totality of their being, that they understood what the future should look like. And neither of them could tolerate the possibility that the future might be large enough for both of them. The lights you turned on today run on Tesla's system. The company that made the device you're watching this on exists because of the model Edison built. You are, right now, the product of both of them. And the question history keeps asking, the question neither man could answer, is the one this rivalry makes unavoidable. Can genius exist without opposition? Or does it require an enemy? A specific, infuriating, worthy enemy to become fully itself? Without Edison, would Tesla have had any reason to prove what he could do? Without Tesla, would Edison have had any reason to show what he was willing to do? Every light that comes on in the dark is, quietly, an answer to that question. We just never bother to read it.